Well, good morning. How are you? Good morning. Hope everyone's well on this Labor Day weekend. I wanted to make you aware of a few announcements before we begin. As you can see, we have a bulletin board up here, and we need help. A week from tomorrow, we're going to be having a spaghetti supper fundraiser for Hurricane Harvey. As you probably, unless you've been in Iraq, you've probably seen plenty of photos and videos of heroes as well as victims of Hurricane Harvey. And so we're going to do a fundraiser. All the donations are going to go to CBF with their disaster relief fund. And so please consider, we have some needs. Can't read over there. Set up, prep, salad prep, serve food, clean tables, clean up. And we also need batches of tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce. So please, if you can do that, that'd be great. We can really use any of the donations that you wouldn't mind giving us. This Wednesday, we're starting back on our Wednesday night activities. So it's going to be a covered dish meal, so please come on out for that and bring your best food for all of us. And then at 6:45, we're going to be having adult Bible study and kids and youth studies as well. Our Bible study that we're going to be starting is going to be on prayer. We're going to be looking at some different types of prayer, different ways we can grow our prayer life. So please come on out for that and for that study and meal. If you are going on the beach trip with the youth, and Jane and Betty, they're going with the youth too. So if you all are going on that, we would. I have some stuff for you guys as well as a need for the money for that. That's $140, so please bring that when you can. Also next Sunday, we're going to have a Beliefs meeting. We're going to have that at 5 o'clock. And that'll be also a time to bring your $100 deposit if you're planning on going on our mission trip in June of 2018. So please come and do that. If you cannot have that, if you don't have that 100, just come talk to me. We can make arrangements. And also, lastly, September 13th, that Wednesday, a week from Wednesday, any Power Oats cookies that you've been asked to make, we're going to be taking those in at that point. Any other announcements that I might have missed? Okay. Let's go into our prayer request. Continue to remember the Hurricane Harvey victims as they're going through this. It's going to be a long while before they see some normalcy in their lives. So please continue to pray for them. Also, I was made aware this morning that Callie, Linda, and Bruce's great-granddaughter, Amy's granddaughter, Leia's daughter, was burned her hand. She's actually at the UNC Chapel Hill Burn Center. She put her hand on the stove, and so she is there. They think she might get to go home today. She has what they think second-degree burns. But so just be in prayer for them if they're going through that. That's scary for anybody, especially a little kid going through that. And also be in prayer for Jane Luquart and her family. Jane lost her sister Elizabeth Barrett, who lives up in Oregon. Our condolences to you, Jane. What other prayer requests might we mention for Thanksgiving?
Josh, I'd like to kind of give you an update on the 14-year-old cousin with cancer. He went through surgery. During surgery, he did have, this was Hunter Thompson. Some of you may know his grandparents. It was Jerry and Janice Thompson who lived in Kansas, so you may know his grandparents. He went through surgery. He did have a stroke or a series of strokes during surgery. So he had some paralysis, but they're working through that. The cancer was stage 1 cancer, luckily. So they're going to be able to hold off any chemo or radiation until they get through physical therapy and get him back up and around on that. So there was a blessing that was only stage 1 cancer.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. What other congregational concerns of Thanksgiving? Yeah, Wayne.
I'd just like to thank everybody for all the cards, the prayers, the food, it's impossible in this church to lose weight. But I will say that this operation is kind of like the movie No Country for Old Men. This is no operation for old men. But I'm doing pretty good, and if I can get off this operation, which I hope to in a month, then I think everything will be fine.
Well, we're
But
glad.
thank you, church.
We're glad to have you back. Anyone else? Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord our God, we are thankful for this day. We are thankful to be in your house among other believers in you. We are thankful that we can share our burdens and our thanksgivings with you as well as our community of faith. Lord, as we enter into worship, may we clear our minds and hearts of anything that would get in the way of knowing you better. God, be with those requests that have been mentioned. Be with those thanksgivings. Allow them to continue. And Lord, we just thank you for Jesus the Christ who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. As you read responsibly our call to worship printed in the bulletin. Come, all you who are thirsty. Come, all you who are hungry. Here at the Lord's table we will eat and drink what is good. Let us gather now as a family around the table. Let us worship God together. Would you stand as we sing our choral call to worship? Lord, listen to your children praying. Page 389. Please stand as we sing.
The Old Testament lesson today comes from 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. David came to Nob to the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech came trembling to meet David, and he said to him, "Why are you alone, and no one with you?" David said to the priest Ahimelech, "The king has charged me with the matter and said to me, 'No one must know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what have you at hand?' 'Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here.' The priest answered David, 'I have no ordinary bread at hand, only holy bread, provided that the young men have kept themselves from women.' David answered the priest, 'Indeed, women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is a common journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?' So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there except the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by the hot bread on the day it is taken away."
You stand again as we sing our hymn, "Let Us Break Bread Together," page 461. Please stand as we sing.
Good morning, boys and girls. How are you? Good. I'm so glad. Did everyone have a good first week of school? Maybe not. Are you tired? You're not going to talk to me today, huh? Okay. Well, that's all right. Well, today is a special day. What do you notice that is different in the sanctuary today? That? What is that? are celebrating the Lord's Supper, or communion it's sometimes called. And what this is it's us taking part in the very last supper that Jesus had with his friends, the disciples. Do you remember before Jesus died on the cross, he had dinner with his friends? Do you remember that? And during his dinner, he took some bread and he broke it and he said, when you eat bread, I want you to think about me. And then he poured some drink in a cup and he said, when you drink of this cup, I want you to think about me too. And Jesus' friends, they didn't understand that he was going to die, did they? They didn't quite get it, did they? So they didn't know that this was going to be the last time that they had dinner with Jesus. But it was. And so now, when we come together as church, we share bread and drink together so that we can remember what Jesus did for us. What did Jesus do? Died on the cross. That's right. And do you know what the bread stands for? What it's a symbol for? It's for Jesus' body. And Jesus' body, was it whole when it was on the cross, or did it get broken? It got broken, so we break the bread. And then when we drink from the cup, what do you think the drink stands for? Jesus' blood, right? Did it stay in his body, or did it come out? That's right, it came out. And so we use that to symbolize his blood, because Jesus gave all of himself so that we could live forever with him, right? So it's a very special time when we come together as a church and share this meal together, because we remember not only did Jesus break his body and spill his blood for his disciples, but he did it for us too. Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you so much for Jesus. Thank you for sending him to die on the cross for us. Help us to always remember what Jesus did, but especially when we take the Lord's Supper. For it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Would you pray with me? Lord our God, as we look at this past week and the devastation down in Texas, Lord, we lift up those who have been most affected. Lord, so many lives have been changed and altered because of this natural disaster. And in the coming months, possibly years, it'll take a long time before they find normalcy. Lord, allow them to know that you are with them. Allow various agencies and people come to their aid. Allow them to know that they are cared for and loved in this most difficult time in their lives. Lord, as we see what we could have done better this last week, and we look at the different heroes that we saw in pictures and on TV, from those who went to help and save the lives of many people. Allow us to do good like they did good. Allow us to do that in our own communities. We can bring a word of hope and encouragement. We can bring a strong and encouraging hug. We can bring whatever their needs are, we can try to meet them. And we can do this all through your grace and your love that sustains us from one day to the next. We thank you for this time to be in your house on this, the Lord's day. For it's in Jesus Christ that we pray. Amen. Stand again as we sing our offertory hymn, Jesus at Your Holy Table, page 466. Please stand as we sing.
satisfy what you've told us to do. Be with us and help us to be thankful for every blessing that you've showered on us. In thy holy name we pray. Amen.
Today's New Testament lesson comes from Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath."
For the last few weeks, we've looked at the sacraments that Protestants and specifically us Baptists partake in. We explored baptism for 2 weeks, and this is our second week that we're looking at the Lord's Supper. And today we're going to again delve into the means of grace that is the Lord's Supper. When preparing for today, I thought I would see how many people, what people thought about the Lord's Supper on the internet. So I Googled this simple question: what does the Lord's Supper mean to you? And after I hit enter, I was inundated with these various message boards. And these message boards, they had a number of questions concerning the Lord's Supper, with dozens and dozens and dozens of replies to those questions. And I read through many of them, and then I started nodding off a bit. But something really struck me as odd. In all those search results, I never saw the word mercy. Never saw the word grace. You know, there were very descriptive words like transubstantiation or sacramental union, very technical phrases. There were even these long diatribes that about who was to partake in the Lord's Supper, who exactly was to get it, how to pass it out, and if a person had to be baptized before taking it. So throughout all of it, though, there was no mention of God's grace and mercy. And I thought that was strange. Because today's Matthew's passage, it kind of has this same ring to it. We see Jesus and his disciples, and they're making their way down the road from one place to another. And during their journey, they all get hungry. But they realize it's the Sabbath day. When people are hungry, obviously we eat. But because they were going through the fields and plucking grains on the Sabbath, it was a different animal in itself. Because that act, it seems innocent enough to us just to go through and graze. I know many of us, my wife included, she likes to graze throughout the day instead of having one big meal here and there. To pick and choose what she wants, right? Yeah. And you know, picking grains along the field, along a trip, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it was because of the Sabbath and what it meant to the Jewish people. Herschel Hobbes, in his commentary and exposition of the four Gospels, he described this in a very humorous way. He wrote, the point at issue had to do with the interpretation of the fourth commandment, to remember the Sabbath and keep the holy commandment. The commandment simply forbade work on the Sabbath, but the Jewish interpreters had proceeded to define work. And they laid down 39 basic actions that violated the Sabbath and then subdivided these into literally hundreds of prohibitions. And the end result, in many cases, was downright silliness. And he goes on to give an example, a couple of examples. He says, a man could not carry a burden on a Sabbath. And a burden was defined as anything which weighed as much as 2 dried figs. He said one favorite topic always had to do with a man and his donkey. He said a man arrived at home just at sunset on Friday and the beginning of the Sabbath, which was Saturday. Should he unload his donkey? Because to do so would involve work for him, but not to do so would mean work for the donkey. And then my favorite of all these, it says a woman should not look in a mirror on the Sabbath, because she might see a gray hair and be tempted to pluck it out. That was regarded as work. So we see so many of these often ridiculous ways of looking at the Sabbath. And Jesus and his disciples, according to the Pharisees, they were violating the Sabbath law. And in their judgments, Jesus and the disciples, they knew what they were doing, the disciples, the Pharisees thought. They understood it, but they thought, in their case, more of mercy than they did of the law. And there are a few things unique to this instance of violating the Sabbath, because in Deuteronomy there's this provision that you can pluck grain. This is one of those mini violations, mini prohibitions, but you can pluck grain as long as you don't use a sickle or a scythe to harvest it. That was very technical. But this is where Jesus decides to make a point, because he always makes it a point to make a point about something. So he gives 3 divine responses to these Pharisees' meticulous rules. In his first response, Jesus cites Jewish history. He uses the David story that was read from 1 Samuel earlier. And David, who was not yet a king, was hungry. And he needed food for him and his men. And so they ate the bread of the presence. And this is also called the shewbread. If you were reading King James, it was the showbread, shewbread. It was an offering that was never to be removed from the altar table in the temple unless this new bread was made and placed on the altar. And throughout Jewish history, only those from the priestly tribe would be allowed to handle this bread. But in the 1 Samuel story of David and his men, hunger won out over tradition and ritual. In the second response, Jesus cites Jewish law, because it was tradition that the sacrifices offered to God in the temple, they had to be consumed by the priest. Consuming those sacrifices would be considered work, since many had to be set on the fire and prepared. However, those priests, they never lost their piety due to their violation of the Sabbath because of who they were. And in his last response to the Pharisees, Jesus cites a Jewish prophet. From Hosea 6:6, we hear these words, "For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Mercy, not sacrifice, Jesus says. And as the Pharisees accuse him and the disciples of violating the Sabbath law, Jesus reiterates that he has this knowledge of God that they don't. He is the Lord of the Sabbath and requires mercy, not sacrifice. And I think we could use more of this mercy and not sacrifice understanding in our own lives from time to time, because many people in this world see compromising as sacrificing who we are for the benefit of another person, but that's not how Jesus sees it. When we compromise our need to be right, or our pride, or our insecurity, we aren't sacrificing anything that doesn't need to be gone. Instead, we are just showing mercy to others. And so you may be asking, what does this have to do with the Lord's Supper? When we think of the Lord's Supper, many people from my Google search included words like sacrifice and atonement for sin, talk of traditions, who gets to partake in the supper and who doesn't. But very few words offer the true meaning of of the Lord's Supper. Mercy, grace, love, all these words that we use to describe Jesus are found at the heart of the supper. Tony Cartledge is a professor of Old Testament studies at Campbell Divinity School, just up the road. Many of you might know him from his writings in Baptist Today. In his book, Telling Stories, Tall Tales, and Deep Truths, he writes about the Lord's Supper and its true meaning. And he says, the material substances of bread and wine remind us of the present reality of Jesus Christ. It is not necessary for us to get involved in endless theological debates about transubstantiation or consubstantiation, trying to imagine if the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ, and if so, when. The issue is not about what we are eating, but our willingness to receive it. When we take the bread and the cup, we willingly align ourselves with Jesus' response to the Pharisees. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I desire grace. I desire forgiveness. I desire God's love. Because our faith is centered on our desire for mercy and not sacrifice. Everything we do as Christ followers must start from this place of mercy, because if we don't, we run the same risk as the Pharisees did. You know, when our tradition or the status quo, when it stops mercy from occurring in our individual lives, the Lord's Supper is forgotten. Because we partake in the Lord's Supper ever as we must remember that God requires mercy. Jesus Christ was merciful to us all the way to the cross, so how much more so should we be merciful to other people in our own lives? Today we're going to take the Lord's Supper. And as you come, do not do so lightly, because as we read last week in the Church of Corinth, partaking in the Lord's Supper, it's a holy endeavor. When we come remembering Jesus' sacrificial death on a cross, we agree to follow Jesus' example in loving others. In just a minute after the prayer of confession, we're going to make our way around this way to partake in the bread and the cup. Let us then read responsibly our prayer of confession printed in the bulletin. Father, we despair that we have so often disarmed your gospel. We have not always sought to hear your voice. When we have heard it, we have often found ourselves too high. We have not loved or ministered to others as ourselves, or as often as Christ taught us. Forgive us, and may your forgiveness free us for greater service through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. It says in 1 Corinthians 11, "For I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, he took a loaf, and he broke it. He said, 'This is my body. Do this in remembrance of me.' And in the same way, he took the cup after the supper, saying, 'The cup is the blood of the new covenant.' Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." And he says, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Would you come now? The table is open. join me as we read responsibly our prayer after receiving? You have given yourself to us, Lord. Now we give ourselves to others. As a people of love, we will serve you. Your glory has filled our hearts. Help us to glorify you in all things. Amen. We're going to sing our closing hymn, The Bond of Love, page 268. And afterwards, would you take a moment to share God's love and peace with those around you? Please stand as we sing The Bond of Love, page 268.